Central and West Canada. Today, I am joined by James Wood and Ryan Ding, who are our digital technical specialists, and we'll be covering Know and Protect Your Data with Microsoft Purview information. So before we dive into the technical details, which we'll be sharing today, I wanted to first start with identifying some of the challenges that we've seen with information protection, as well as how Microsoft's information protection solution can support some of those challenges. Then we'll dive into info types and sensitivity labels, as well as Azure Information Protection Scanner. James Wood will be covering that portion, and then Ryan Ding will carry us out in a demo teaching us how to configure sensitivity labels and DLP policies, as well as configuring the AIP scanner. As Ryan mentioned, please feel free to pop questions into the chat. I'm happy to answer as we go through or send answers in follow-up. So in today's digital world, data is one of the most valuable assets a company can have. However, we realize that with this increased value comes an increased risk of data breaches, leaks, and other forms of data loss. So that's why it's essential for organizations to know their data, protect their data, prevent data loss, and govern their data effectively. And you'll find that this framework is going to be a common theme throughout our conversation today. So discovering and managing data is challenging. All organizations are dealing with data that is sensitive, and protecting this data we know is a top priority for them. But we also know that it's easier said than done. So just finding that data is a challenge, knowing how to identify it and where it's located, as well as how it's being shared both internally and externally, is such a huge problem that 80% of that knowledge is dark to most of our customers. So with that, 88% of organizations have no confidence that they can detect and prevent loss of their sensitive data. When you add that to our current climate of remote work and data being shared through non-corporate managed devices in non-corporate locations, the problem just continues. But today, I want to focus less on the problems and challenges and focus more on how we solve them. So when we talk about information protection and governance, it includes those 4 steps that I mentioned earlier. Know your data, protect your data, prevent data loss, and govern your data. Knowing your data means understanding what data you have, where it's located, and who has access to it, and how those individuals are using the data. So once you understand your data estate, you can then leverage a unified approach to classify information and enforce policy. For example, you can build your own classifiers to identify company-specific sensitive information. Then protecting your data means implementing security measures that prevent unauthorized access, such as applying protection or governance policies, encryption, and access controls. You can also apply watermark, headers, and footers to protect that classified data. Preventing data loss means having the mechanisms in place to prevent accidental or intentional data leaks, such as data loss prevention tools. And then finally, governing your data means having policies and procedures in place to ensure that data is managed in a consistent and compliant way, such as data retention policies and data classification frameworks. You can create archiving rules, enforce retention and deletion policy, as well as manage business critical information as records and trigger disposition reviews. So all of the policies are applied to contents and places where users are collaborating. By focusing on these 4 areas, knowing your data, protecting your data, preventing data loss, and governing your data, organizations can right away minimize the risk of data breaches and other security incidents, while also enabling secure and compliant data sharing and collaboration. So Microsoft provides tools to help you monitor the classification and policy enforcement. For example, the Content and Activity Explorer gives you transparency in how classifications are applied and how accuracy can be improved. The Unified Audit Logs in Microsoft 365 allow you to search for sharing, accessing, downloading activities, and more so that you can monitor and investigate risky events. We also keep proof of disposal for 7 years so you can respond to regulators and auditors defensively. Now that we've covered the importance of information protection and governance, I want to take a look at Microsoft's Purview information protection solution. So Purview is a comprehensive suite of tools and services that are designed to help you classify and protect your data, as well as stay compliant with various regulations and policies. So it's essentially a framework that provides visualization of sensitive data, lifecycle protection for data, and data loss prevention. One of the key features of Purview data classification is Office 365. And you can see that this protection extends across Exchange, Teams, SharePoint, Power BI, and our entire O365 suite of applications. So with this tool, you can easily discover, classify, and protect your sensitive information across the entire organization. This is going to include things like personal data, financial information, and intellectual property. So by accurately identifying and classifying this data, you can better protect it from unauthorized access or disclosure. Another important component of Purview is going to be endpoint DLP or data loss prevention. This feature allows you to monitor and control the flow of sensitive data on your endpoints, such as laptops and mobile devices. This is going to come in handy in terms of organizations who are working in a remote environment or hybrid environment. You can set policies to prevent users from accidentally or intentionally leaking data and track any potential breaches in real time. Then Defender for Cloud Apps is another aspect of Purview. It's a cloud-native security solution that helps you protect your cloud applications and services, such as Microsoft 365, from those various cyber threats. It's going to use advanced AI and machine learning to detect and prevent attacks in real time, and also provides actionable insights and recommendations to help you stay one step ahead of potential threats and also eliminate that responsibility being on your security team or IT staff. This is going to help you push out policies to third-party applications within your environment. So if you think of the organizations that are listed here, Workday, Dropbox, Salesforce, Defender for Cloud Apps is not limited to those. There are so many more that it integrates with. And then for those who have on-premise environments as well as hybrid environments, Purview provides advanced compliance solutions and data governance services. This includes tools for archiving, e-discovery, and retention management, as well as compliance controls for various regulations such as GDPR, HIPAA, and so much more, depending on your industry. We'll touch more on our protection for on-premise environments in the next couple of slides, where James will take us through the AIP scanner. Overall, Purview is a powerful information protection solution that can help you stay on top of your data security and compliance needs by leveraging tools like the data classification in Office 365, Endpoint DLP, as well as Defender for Cloud Apps, and advanced compliance solutions. You can better protect your data and maintain the trust of your customers and partners. So while this slide encompasses the comprehensive suite of features and functionalities in Purview, today we're only going to be covering that data classification service, as well as how to apply those sensitivity labels and protections to your cloud environment, as well as on-prem files. So I'll pass it over to James so he can, so he can continue sharing how we know our data, protect, govern, and prevent data loss, and have data loss prevention. James, over to you.
James, looks like you might still be on mute.
Oh, thanks, Ryan. So, yeah, sorry, thanks, Jada. And so as Jada just mentioned, the first step to safeguarding our data is really understanding our data. So data classification is really crucial for any business that deals with critical information. So it helps us identify what kind of data we have, where it's stored, and how it's accessed. So by classifying our data, we can apply the appropriate level of protection to each category of data and really prevent unauthorized or accidental exposure. But knowing our data is not always easy. There's a lot of challenges and questions that we need to address in today's complex and dynamic data environment. For example, what kinds of sensitive data do we have in our organization? How do we define sensitivity and risk? Where's our data located? Is it on premises, in the cloud, or on personal devices? And how do we control who can access and use our data? So these are some of the topics that we're going to keep exploring throughout today's session, and we'll also show you some tools and best practices that can help you discover, classify, and protect your data across the entire organization. So data discovery and classification is really a process of identifying where your sensitive data is stored and what kind of data it is. Sensitive data can really vary depending on your organization's needs and the type of data that you work with. So not all data has the same level of sensitivity or risk. And Microsoft offers a huge range of tools and capabilities to really help you discover and classify that data, both on premises and in the cloud. You can start by using our over 300 predefined sensitive information types that cover common scenarios such as credit card numbers, social security numbers, and other personal information. For example, if you work in the healthcare industry, you can use the HIPAA sensitive information type to detect data that's protected by that regulation. You can also create your own custom sensitive information types or use your own dictionary of terms to match your specific requirements. So this gives you more control and flexibility over how you define and detect your sensitive data. For example, if you have like a proprietary product or a service that has a unique name or acronym, you can create a custom sensitive information type or add it to your dictionary of terms to ensure that that's detected and protected as well. And then in addition to Office apps, you can also discover sensitive data in other locations like on-premises file stores, SharePoint sites, Teams and Office 365 groups, Exchange Online, SharePoint Online, and even non-Microsoft clouds and SaaS apps as well. And then we also have the content and activity explorers, which give you unique insights into your data. So the Content Explorer is a tool that allows you to view and manage the content in your organization that's been labeled or classified according to your policies. So you can use the Content Explorer to see the current state of the items that have a sensitivity label or retention label or have been identified as containing a sensitive information type. So for example, you can see how many items have been labeled as confidential, how many items have, let's say, a retention policy of 5 years, or how many items contain credit card numbers. The Content Explorer also provides you with information such as the location, owner, and last modified date of the items, and you can filter, sort, and export the results to get a really comprehensive overview of your labeled or classified data. And then with the Activity Explorer, you can monitor and analyze how your users interact with your sensitive data. So for example, you can see if they're sharing it with external partners, reducing its protection level by removing encryption, or deleting it permanently from the cloud. You can also use filters to narrow down the results by label or file type or activity type. So for instance, you can filter by the label confidential to see only the data that has that classification, or by the file type PDF to see only those types of documents, or even by an activity like download to see the data that's only been downloaded by the users. So the Activity Explorer gives you a really comprehensive view of how your data is being used and protected. And so like now that we've discussed some of the ways to classify our data, we can start protecting it with sensitivity labels. So sensitivity labels are a way of classifying and protecting your data according to its level of sensitivity. So they can help you comply with your organization's policies and regulations and ensure that your data is secure and accessible only to authorized people. So sensitivity labels can be applied manually by users when they create or edit content, or automatically by policies that you define based on the type of data. And then sensitivity labels can perform various actions to protect the data as well, such as encrypting files, emails, meetings, groups, and sites with different permissions for different users or groups. So for example, you can apply a highly confidential label to a document that contains sensitive customer information and restrict its access to only a few people in the organization. And then you can also add content markings such as headers, footers, and watermarks to indicate the sensitivity level of the content as well. And then additionally, you can display policy tips to inform users about the sensitivity of the data and guide them to make appropriate decisions. For example, you can show a policy tip to a user who tries to send an email with a personal label to an external recipient. And then sensitivity labels work across different platforms and devices. They support all the Office apps like Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and Outlook. And then they even work across SharePoint sites, Teams channels, and Microsoft 365 groups. So information protection policies are really essential for securing your data and ensuring compliance. And to get started with creating and applying these policies, you can follow some basic guidelines. So the first step is to define the structure and priority of your labels. So labels are used to classify your data according to its sensitivity and impact. You can group labels into parent labels and sublabels to create a hierarchy. So for example, you can have a parent label called confidential, and then sublabels for different types of confidential data like financial, legal, or medical. And then if you don't have an existing taxonomy, you can always start with some common label names like personal, public, general, confidential, and highly confidential, things like that. Then the second step is to enable your end users to manually label their data. So this gives them more control and responsibility over their data protection. You can also configure settings to enforce mandatory labeling or assign default labels to certain data types or locations. This way you can ensure that all your data is labeled appropriately. Then the third step is to provide policy tips to your end users. So like I mentioned in the previous slide, policy tips are the pop-up messages that inform users when they're working with sensitive data and suggest the best label for it. So users can accept or reject the recommendation based on their judgment. And the policy tips really help users make more informed decisions and avoid accidental data leaks. And then the fourth step is to automate your labeling process by using rules and conditions. So you can apply labels to data at rest in SharePoint and OneDrive, or data in transit and Exchange. And this way you can scale up your data protection efforts and cover more data sources and scenarios. And then finally, kind of the last key components of our information protection strategy is the Azure Information Protection, the AIP scanner. So this is a tool that allows us to scan our on-premises data sources, such as file shares and SharePoint sites, to identify and classify sensitive data. So it helps us to discover and secure data that might be vulnerable to exposure or misuse. So first, you can automate the discovery of potentially insecure file shares containing sensitive information by scanning IP ranges using the network discovery feature of the scanner, and then prioritize the scanner of overshared or publicly accessible shares. Next, you can inspect the contents of the file shares found in the previous step, as well as SharePoint libraries to discover sensitive information. After that, you can apply the sensitivity labels to the content containing important information based on the previously defined policies, rules, and conditions. And then wherever appropriate, in addition to labeling, you can apply protection to the files by enforcing encryption and access control restrictions. And so now we've kind of discovered how we can classify and protect our data both in the cloud and on premises. I'm going to pass it over to Ryan, who can actually show us a demo of how to use the data classification tools, the sensitivity labels, and the AIP scanner as well. So take it away, Ryan.
Thank you, James. That was a very comprehensive overview. Keeping in mind the framework James and Jada described of know your data, protect your data, prevent data loss, and govern your data, I'm going to walk you through step by step how to begin applying sensitivity labels to files and documents across your cloud and on-prem environment, as well as how to configure DLP policies to prevent leakage of information if we have time. And then I'm going to round it out with the configuration of the AIP scanner for your on-premise files. So with that kind of framework in mind of those four pillars, today we will only be mostly covering the first two. If you are interested in learning more about prevent data loss with endpoint DLP, as well as data governance and any kind of e-discovery and audit, please stay tuned for our future webinars and any kind of upcoming documentation. So let's go ahead and jump into the Microsoft Purview compliance portal. I'm going to go ahead and share my screen. So your entire Purview catalog of solutions can be found here and accessed using any browser on any device, giving you a unified admin experience to manage all of your information protection, DLP, and other compliance needs in one location. So that first thing we'd like to do is to know our data. We want to identify across my organization, what do we consider to be sensitive info or data? What do we want to protect? So to do that, we're going to begin on the data classification plate. And hopefully some of these sound familiar from James's portion of the presentation. I'm going to go over to the classifiers tab. Here is where we can start to identify what kind of information our organization is going to consider to be sensitive information. On the sensitive info types tab, you will see that out of the box, Microsoft has already pre-configured over 200 sensitive info types that are common to businesses and use cases globally. Some examples include PII, such as social security numbers, credit card numbers, routing numbers, and even credential types like AWS access keys and Azure access tokens. James has also mentioned a common use cases is HIPAA information for our hospitals. So we do have sensitive info types that are kind of collections of various items that we're looking for. On top of these pre-configured sensitive info types, at the top, you also have the ability to create your own sensitive info types using a custom one. So you can look for certain keywords, primary and secondary elements, regular expressions, and other match types that you have specified yourself. I'm going to go ahead and look for one that is very common. So something like Social Security number. You will see if I click into a sensitive info type, such as a US Social Security number, and I apologize, my internet seems to be a little bit slower today, but you will be able to see the exact details of what we are looking for in a match, including primary and supporting elements, character proximity, and confidence level. Under the Matched Items tab, you can see exactly where in your environment that this sensitive info type has been found. You can see if I click into it, and it will show me, hey, this item has been found in your OneDrive in 23 different files. And it will show me exactly whose drives this info type has been found in what files. And you will see a similar view kind of in the Content Explorer, which I will show in a little bit. But this doesn't seem to be loading right now. I'm going to go back into the classifiers. Back on the classifiers blade, we also have trainable classifiers and exact data match classifiers. Trainable classifiers allow us to feed our machine learning model seed data or existing content. Let me just let this refresh really quickly. So basically, we're feeding it seed data or existing content so that it can recognize similar content in the same category. Similar to our sensitive info types, Microsoft also provides many of these classifiers out of the box that we can use as a template. We can identify document types such as bank statements, financial agreements, legal documents, as well as catch malicious written actions if we scroll down to the bottom, such as harassment, threats, and profanity. But you also have the ability to obviously feed it your own data. So for example, you may point it to something like a SharePoint site full of resumes so that your classifier can learn to identify resumes in other areas of your environment. And again, apologize for the, seems to be loading slowly because of my internet here. The exact data matches classifiers allows us to use exact values from our org's data to detect exact matches rather than generic patterns. We can connect data stores directly to scan for content that matches existing data. And then finally, the Content Explorer allows us to take a deeper view into our sensitive information across the organization. So that's kind of that first step of knowing our data. We want to identify what we consider to be sensitive info. And once we do that, we can begin to configure and apply protections to our sensitive info. So to do that, we are going to hop over to our information protection blade to the labels page. So once we know what we consider to be sensitive info, we want to basically assign sensitive info types, either one or multiple, to labels that we can then use to start labeling our data, either to singular files or to containers. So to do that, we are just going to go ahead and create a label. So in this example, I might do something like create a label for financial data. You will have the ability to specify a display name, so what your users will see, where it's published, so when they're actually applying the labels. So you might have something that says like financial data, confidential, a description for users. So you might say something like, please do not distribute outside of organization, as well as a description for admins. And you also have the ability to give the label a color. So I might give something like this, an orange color. On the next page, you have the ability to define the scope for this label. Are we going to apply it to only singular items, or we also want to apply this to containers as well? Oh, it kicked me out. Let me really quickly give this the information one more time. The color. So on the items page, you have the ability to specify, are we going to only protect files that are in Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and across Office? Do we also want to protect our emails and meetings as well? The groups and sites checkbox allows you to scope the label also to containers. So things such as Microsoft Teams and Microsoft 365 groups, as well as SharePoint sites. And then also in public preview now is the ability to apply these files to schematized data assets in your Azure subscriptions. So things such as Azure SQL, Azure Synapse, AWS RDS, and more. For today, we're just going to go with a basic configuration. We want to apply this to some items across our M365 environment. The next page allows you to specify some basic protection settings. So the first one is to apply or remove encryption. So what this does is this label will, when it's applied to any documents, will encrypt that document, and then that document encryption basically then scopes it to a certain subset of users that will have the ability to open the document. So you can scope it to either all of the users in your organization or to a certain subset of users. And then even if that document is somehow sent to someone that it shouldn't have, because it is encrypted, that user that is not in the scope of the encryption will not be able to open the document anyways. You also have the ability to apply custom content marking, so headers, footers, and watermarks to items that have this label to denote that it is an item with sensitive information in it. I'm going to go ahead and just apply or remove encryption. The next page allows you to specify your encryption settings. So you can decide as an admin, do I want to assign the permissions now? So do I want to scope this label now to a certain subset of users, or do I want to give the users the ability to assign the permissions when they apply the label? So if a user is drafting an email or creating a new document, when they apply this label, they can then kind of scope it and decide who they want to have permission to share this with. You can also decide whether access to the content will expire on a specific date after a certain number of days, or they will have access to it indefinitely, and the ability to allow offline access or not. The last thing is to assign the permissions. So we have some kind of quick templates of, hey, you can add all the users in your organization. You can only add certain users or groups or certain email addresses or domains as well. I'm just going to go ahead and add all the users in my organization. The next page allows you to add auto labeling for files and emails. And to be clear, this applies only to kind of new files and emails that are currently being worked on. So what this allows you to do is if someone is working on a document or an email and you have detected certain conditions, so we are scanning these documents as they're being worked on, so we can look for certain sensitive info types. So if they type something out that has a sensitive info type, we can automatically apply a label or recommend that the user applies a label. So for example, I might add something like either a sensitive info type or a trainable classifier that I've configured. All the sensitive info types that we have seen in the first kind of step of know your data are available here. So I might do something like that social security number. You can add as many of these as you want, and then you can also have group operators. So am I looking for all of these together? Am I looking for any of these? And then as well as a confidence level and an instance count. And then if it is found to match these conditions, do I want to automatically apply a label, or do I want a pop-up to come up in that app recommending that the user apply the label themselves? And then I can also customize a message to the user when they get that pop-up. I'm just going to go ahead and configure it to automatically apply the label. I'm going to skip over this one. We have protection settings for our groups and sites, which we are not configuring in this policy, as well as our schematized data assets. Excuse me. And then the last page will just be to review the settings of this label and to go ahead and finish it. So I'm going to go ahead and cancel it out here because I do already have labels set up. Once you have finished that label, you will see it appear in the rest of your labels here. As James said, with all the labels, you can have labels and sublabels, as well as a kind of a prioritized hierarchy of labels. So you can have some labels take precedence over others in terms of one policy taking precedence over another. So once you've done this step of creating a label, it is actually not yet available for users to manually apply, other than through that kind of auto labeling of new documents and emails, to give them the ability to actually apply that label in their M365 app. So in their Outlook app, in Word and Excel, you will actually go ahead and need to publish that label. So I'm going to go ahead and publish a label. I'm going to choose which sensitivity label to publish. I can choose any of the ones I've already created, so I might go ahead and use this highly confidential label. You have administrative units in Azure AD if you want to kind of scope the assignment of that to an admin unit. But this next page allows you to specify the availability of the label for users and groups. So if you don't want everyone in the organization to have access to a label, you can scope this to certain users and groups that will have the ability to apply this label. I think by default, it's just everyone in the organization, which I will leave there. In the policy settings page, you have some options here. So the first one is, does the user have the ability to remove a label or lower its classification? And if they do that, do they need to provide a justification in order to do so? Are you going to require users to apply a label to their emails and documents? So any new documents or emails, can you leave it unlabeled, or do they have to have a label applied? Are you going to require users to apply label to Power BI content? And then you have the ability to provide users with a link to a custom help page if you decide to do so. The next page allows you to apply a default label to documents. And this is actually a practice that we highly recommend, and Microsoft does ourselves, where we have a default label that's applied to any new documents or emails. And what our default label does is it's scoped to everyone within the organization. So by default, any new document, any new email we create is encrypted to everyone within Microsoft, and we would not be able to easily share it outside of the organization. But you have the ability to specify a default label, and then you can kind of scope that default label however you would see fit. So I might apply this highly confidential label or something like a default label. I can apply default labels to emails, or I can just do the same as documents, as well as have the ability to inherit labels from attachments. Same thing for meetings, calendar, events, and Power BI, which I'm going to quickly skip over. And then the last thing is going to just be a name for our sensitivity label policy. So this one, if we're using, if in this example we were publishing that financial label, I might just do financial label policy. And go ahead and click next, and the last page will be a review and finish page. And once you submit that, it will publish the label, and this label will now be available for your users to manually apply to new documents and emails. So we've kind of covered how we can apply sensitivity labels and identify sensitive information in our new content. But what about all of our existing content, right? So you might have, thousands of files or emails or documents in SharePoint or OneDrive or even on-prem that you want to label and protect. So how do we protect that as well? So this is where the auto labeling comes in. So we're going to want to go to auto labeling, and we can create an auto labeling policy. So once you create this, basically we are going to go ahead and scan through all of our M365 data stores. So your SharePoint, your OneDrive, your Exchange, even your Teams chats, and look for sensitive info that you've specified in these auto labeling policies. And if it's found, we are going to go ahead and slap our sensitivity labels on it that are corresponding to these sensitive info types. So just going to show you what that looks like really quickly. For this auto labeling policy, you have the ability to it's going to look similar to that label publishing, where you can decide, hey, I want to look for sensitive info types that I've specified, but we also have created categorical templates that will help you really easily kind of get these auto labeling policies up and running. So you can see here we have one for HIPAA already, and it's going to look for all of these certain sensitive info types. These include trainable classifiers as well. So just a collection of different kind of classifiers that are pre-templated for you. So I'm going to go ahead and use this HIPAA one. Give it a name. Gonna skip through the admin units. I can choose the locations where I want to apply this label. So across my Exchange, my SharePoint sites, my OneDrive accounts, and then depending on the type of sensitive information we're looking for, we will also have the ability to look for this across our Teams chats and channels as well as some of our other containers. I'm just going to leave this as default with these three. You have the ability to set up some common or advanced rules. So with common rules, all of these rules are going to be predefined for you. What kind of sensitive info types it's looking for, is what kind of combination of things, the confidence level, the instance count, those are all going to be predefined. You also have the ability to set up your own advanced rules if you do want to get super granular into that, and kind of tweak the sensitivity of what you're looking for. So we are just going to use the same set of rules across all of our locations. So just going to leave that as is. And then kind of the last thing is just going to be to choose the label to auto apply. So if we found any of this information in this HIPAA template, and it's kind of decided that it's a match, what sensitivity label do I want to apply here? So these are the ones that you've already specified before. So in this example, I might have a label for HIPAA specific information. I'm going to choose a label. So just going to choose secret. Some additional settings for email if you want to replace existing labels that have same or lower priority. And then right before you finish the auto labeling policy, you have the ability to kind of decide on the simulation mode. So since the auto labeling policy will actually go throughout your entire M365 environment and not only scan for your files and scan for sensitive information, but also the goal is to begin applying the sensitivity labels right. And we don't, and since these labels might have encryption on them, we don't want to accidentally lock your users out of something that they might be working on. So when you do create a new policy, it will run the policy in a simulation mode. So that's kind of a read-only mode where it's doing discovery, it's looking for all these documents, and it will tell you, hey, this is the set of documents we found that is matching these conditions that you've set. This is what would be labeled if it was not in simulation mode. From there, you can kind of decide, hey, this is exactly what I'm looking for, or maybe I need to make a couple tweaks to the rules and the policies that I've set. But then once you're kind of confident or comfortable with the level of confidence in the policy, then you can turn the simulation mode off and run it in the actual mode, and it will start to go ahead and apply these sensitivity labels across your M365 environment. Okay. Yep, so now we've covered kind of how to get started with our sensitivity labels in the cloud, how to kind of know our data, decide what's sensitive, and then begin applying these sensitivity labels to our documents across OneDrive, SharePoint, anything in M365. But what about our on-prem resources? So to extend these same sensitivity labels and the same kind of scanning ability to our on-prem environments, we do need to go ahead and configure the AIP scanner. So I'm going to really quickly go back to the slide that James had shared, and just wanted to quickly retouch on some of the things related to the architecture. So as James had briefly mentioned, the AIP scanner allows us to extend our labeling and classification service to your on-prem resources. So what that means is you will need to basically install an AIP scanner physically on a device or a VM or something on-prem. And along with that, you will also need to set up a SQL Server database, and basically the SQL Server will just maintain some configurations and telemetries about the data in your organization. But once you've done that, it will be scanning your file shares, your NAS storage, your SharePoint servers, looking for that sensitive info, and hopefully applying these labels. That scanner cluster on-prem will be tied to an AIP scanner cluster in Node in the cloud, which you will configure in the Azure Information Protection portal in your Azure AD portal. And this is what allows us to feed all of our data on-prem. So any of this sensitive info that's been found on-prem will also feed up into your M365 Purview Compliance Center, right? So that Content Explorer, that Activity Explorer that we've been talking about and showing you guys, where you can see that, hey, we found all this sensitive info in OneDrive or in SharePoint. This allows us to also see all of our on-prem data files in the same admin center in that M365 Compliance Center. Okay, so for the purposes of the demo, assuming that you've kind of already done some of the prerequisites and set up a machine, or you have a machine on-prem that you want to install the server cluster, you already have a SQL Server database set up for this. I just want to show you guys a few things of how to get this up and running on the Azure side of things, and what are some of the prerequisites on the Azure side of things before that scanner will be up and running. So I'm going to go ahead and go to my Azure portal. So I'm just going to go to portal.azure.com. I am going to go to my Azure Information Protection Service and just go to clusters. First thing you're going to want to do is pretty simple. I'm just going to go ahead and add a cluster name. So it might just be something really simple like NA South. Go ahead and save that. Next, we are going to configure a content scan job. So we're going to go over to content scan job and create a new one. So the scan job is what's actually going to define kind of how the scan is run on premise. So I might, be scanning for, financial data scan. So in the content scan job settings, you have the ability to kind of define the schedule for the scan job to run. Is it going to be manual, or is it going to run on a schedule? What types of information are we going to scan for and discover? Down at the bottom, you have the ability to decide, do we want to enforce policies, label, and protection on this job? For this first job, we would definitely recommend kind of similar to that simulation mode. Let's just do discovery this first time, right? So we're going to leave off the settings to kind of enforce our labeling and DLP rules for now. We want to just first discover where our sensitive info is going to be found. So I'm going to go ahead and just save this as is. Once that is done, I'm going to go into here, and I also need to specify the repositories that I want to scan this in. So this might be something really simple like, your C drive data, and you can just save a repository there. And then lastly, we're going to go back to our content scan jobs, and we're going to assign this to our cluster that we've created. So we're going to assign it to that NA South cluster. So before our scanner can work, we need to grant a few permissions to basically allow it. Once you've installed it on-prem, it needs to have the ability to, read and write data back up to your Azure portal, back to your M365 Compliance Center. So to do that, we are going to go to our Azure app registrations. And we can go ahead and create maybe a new registration. So this might be AP scanner. We can leave the supported account types as is, and then for the redirect URI, we can just do localhost. I'm going to go ahead and register that. So this step is very important. Once you've created that app registration, you need to note down a couple things here under the essentials. So you're going to need the application client ID, as well as the tenant ID. These will be parameters that you will paste into your PowerShell command when you are installing and configuring the scanner on-prem. We are also going to need to create a secret for our app to use during authentication. So I'm going to go ahead and create a new client secret here. Go ahead and add that as well. And you will also want to note down this scanner secret as well, as that is another parameter for the installation. So we also want to grant API permissions to the user running the scan service. So we're going to go to API permissions. Oh, this is the wrong one. Oh, this is the one I just created. Yep. So go to API permissions, and we're going to need to add some new permissions to the user running the service. So I'm going to go ahead to Azure Rights Management, application permissions, and we want to give this user read and write permission. Go ahead and add that. We also want to add permissions for the Microsoft Information Protection Sync API. So I'm going to look for the protection sync service. We are going to give it application permissions. Go ahead and click that checkbox. And now that we've specified all the permissions, we just want to click this check for grant admin consent for Contoso. And now all of our permissions have been granted. So with that, you've pretty much completed all the prerequisites for installing and configuring that AIP scanner. The next thing you're going to do is just go to the Microsoft documentation. We have the documentation on how what PowerShell commands you'll need to run. So you will see that install AIP scanner commandlet with your SQL Server instance name, your cluster name, and then when you are kind of configuring that as well, you will also need your application ID, your app secret, your tenant ID, which are all parameters that we have noted down from those app registration permissions that we've just set. Okay, so that pretty much brings us to the end of the demo portion. I did want to show you guys a couple of things as well when it comes to, you know, what the end user is going to see once you've kind of configured all of these policies. Let me share my screen really quickly. So this is just a screenshot of Microsoft Word. So once you've kind of applied these sensitivity labels and published them, they will now be available across all of your Office applications. So you will see that a user, if they're working on a Word document, they have the ability to open this sensitivity label option on the right here and apply a sensitivity label. And in this example, the sensitivity label has watermarking applied to it. So once they've applied this label, you will see the watermarking appear on the document. And then you will also see on the bottom here that the document has a little lock symbol and it's specified to be highly confidential, which is specifying that it is encrypted now and that label has been successfully applied. This example is showing off a little bit of the auto labeling as you're working on documents. So you might have a label that is looking for specific keywords such as Project Jupyter or AI 500. As users working on this, we are continually scanning throughout our M365 environment. So we have detected these keywords. The user is going to get a pop-up saying, hey, we found sensitive information. You are recommended to apply the sensitivity label top secret. And then the user has the ability to apply the sensitivity label directly from there. Another cool item that we've kind of rolled out recently is that now with PDFs as well, any kind of document in M365 that you export as a PDF, if it already has a sensitivity label on it, that PDF will then retain that sensitivity label as well. And so that document that as a PDF will still be encrypted, and it will still have the same kind of protections as your other Microsoft document types. Okay, so with that, concludes the demo portion. I'm going to go ahead and pass it back over to Jada to kind of close this out. And we do have a couple minutes at the end for questions.
Thank you, Ryan. So appreciate you taking us through how our customers can get started with information protection by labeling their cloud and on-prem data. This brings us to the conclusion of our webinar today. And as I alluded to earlier, data classification is only a small component of our comprehensive Purview solution. Classifying and labeling your data is just the first step to achieving end-to-end data security and governance. So to learn more about the rest of our Purview catalog, including Endpoint DLP, Defender for Cloud Apps, data governance, and advanced compliance, please continue to stay in tune for our future webinars or utilize any of the following resources that I'm sharing in the next slide. So here's a list of resources that's going to help you assist you in our online documentation, blogs, and roadmap tool. So a lot of the links that were shared in the chat, this will be similar to those links. We've also linked some information regarding licensing. If you are interested in learning more about licensing, I saw a few comments and questions in the chat regarding licensing, as well as getting a free trial of any of the Purview compliance solutions. Most definitely reach out to your account executive or your territory specialist that you're aligned to within your Microsoft account. And then you can also reach out to any of us and we'll do our best to route your request as quickly as possible. So again, thank you so much. We hope that out of today's session, we were able to provide a jumpstart in your journey to data security and compliance. I know that we are down to the last few minutes, but if there are any questions or comments, please feel free to pop them in the chat and we can answer them as they come in. Thank you so much for joining our webinar today. Please stay tuned for our future webinars. We'll be covering a variety of topics applicable to customers like yourself that are in the journey of migrating to the cloud. And do we have any last minute questions that we haven't answered so far? I'm not seeing anything. Thank you everyone so much for your time. Yes, we are recording this webinar. And Shay, I know that you're more familiar with how we send this out to customers. Do you have any comments in terms of how attendees will receive the recording of this session?
Absolutely. A follow-up email will be sent before the end of the week, and you would also get access to the video on our YouTube channel. We've put the link in the chat for you to reference after this webinar. Thank you, Jada.
Yeah, thank you so much. Thank you, everyone.